The transport ship shuddered as it docked with Epsilon 7 station. Ha-Young pressed her face to the small window and watched the massive structure grow larger. The Galactic Defense Academy was bigger than anything she had ever seen. Ships from dozens of worlds moved around it like insects around a bright light. She picked up her single bag and joined the line of new cadets, walking toward the airlock. The other students talked excitedly in many different languages. Some were tall and strong like the Krathari warriors. Others had blue skin and large eyes like the smart Villani people. A few looked almost human but had strange markings on their faces. Ha-Young kept quiet and tried not to draw attention to herself. She was shorter than most of the other cadets and looked very ordinary. Her black hair was tied back in a simple style. Her clothes were plain and cheap. Nothing about her suggested she was special in any way. The airlock opened with a loud hiss. Director Taemin stood waiting for them in the main corridor. He was a middle-aged human man with kind eyes and gray hair. He smiled as the cadets gathered around him. "Welcome to the Galactic Defense Academy," he said. His voice was warm but strong. "You come from many worlds and many species, but here you will learn to work together. The galaxy needs protectors who understand that our differences make us stronger." Ha-Young noticed that his eyes found her in the crowd for just a moment. There was something in his look that made her wonder if he knew more about her than he should, but then he looked away and continued talking to the group. They walked through long corridors filled with busy people. Instructors in uniform moved past them with quick steps. Older cadets ran toward training rooms. The walls were covered with pictures of famous graduates who had become heroes in battles across the galaxy. Ha-Young's roommate was a cheerful human boy named Jin-Ho. He talked constantly as they unpacked their few belongings in the small room they would share. "I can't believe we're really here," Jin-Ho said. He held up a small device that projected images of his family. "My parents saved money for years to pay for the transport. They said this is the only way a farm boy like me could see the stars." Ha-Young nodded and smiled, but she didn't talk much about her own background. When Jin-Ho asked where she came from, she gave vague answers about a small colony world. She let him think she was just another poor kid looking for a better life. The next morning brought their first classes. Combat training was held in a large room with soft mats on the floor. Instructor Rilak was a scary-looking alien with dark green skin and scars covering his arms. He had fought in many wars and his voice sounded like gravel. "Combat is not about being the strongest," he told them. "It is about being smart and quick. Even the smallest fighter can win if they know what they are doing." The cadets paired off for practice fights. Ha-Young was matched with a huge Krathari student named Vexstar. He was twice her size and covered in thick muscle. The other students stopped to watch, expecting to see her get hurt. Vexstar came at her like a charging bull. Ha-Young moved to the side at the last second and he stumbled past her. The other cadets laughed, thinking it was just luck. They fought for several more minutes. Ha-Young seemed to barely hold her own, backing away and avoiding his attacks. When the match ended, Vexstar had scored more points. Ha-Young looked tired and disappointed. She thanked him for the practice and walked away without complaining about the loss. But Instructor Rilak had watched carefully. He noticed things the other students missed. Ha-Young's movements were too smooth for someone who was really struggling. Her breathing was too steady for someone who was really tired. And there had been a moment when Vexstar left himself open for an easy counterattack, but she had held back. After class, Ha-Young went to the medical bay for the required health check. Dr. Bio-Ram was a quiet human woman who had been at the academy for many years. She ran the normal scans and tests, but when the other students left, she pulled Ha-Young aside. "I need to run a few extra tests," Dr. Bio-Ram said. Her voice was casual, but her eyes were serious. "Just some additional scans to make sure everything is working properly?" The extra tests took much longer and used equipment that Ha-Young didn't recognize. Dr. Bio-Ram asked strange questions about her medical history and family background. When Ha-Young gave the same vague answers she had given Jin-Ho, the doctor just nodded and made notes on her computer. "Everything looks normal," Dr. Bio-Ram said when they were finished. but she typed a message on her computer and marked it with high security codes before sending it to Director Tae-Min. The next few weeks fell into a routine. Ha-young attended classes and trained with the other cadets. She was average in most subjects and slightly below average in others. Her instructors noted that she tried hard but didn't seem to have any special talents. In weapons training, she struggled to hit targets that other students found easy. In space navigation, she made simple mistakes that caused her team to get lost during simulations. In tactical studies, her battle plans were too basic and predictable. The other cadets started to feel sorry for her. Jinho helped her with homework every night. Even Vexstar, who usually ignored humans, offered to give her extra combat practice. They all thought she was a nice girl who was trying her best, but wasn't really meant for military life. Only a few people noticed the small things that didn't add up. During a night training exercise, the group got lost in the station's lower levels. While the others argued about which way to go, Ha-young quietly suggested a path that led them straight to the exit. When they asked how she knew the way, she shrugged and said she had studied the station maps. In the cafeteria, she sometimes finished eating before others even though she had started last. When Jinho mentioned it, she laughed and said she was always hungry after training. During weapons practice, her missed shots sometimes hit the wall in patterns that looked almost like she was aiming for specific spots. But when Instructor Ralak checked the target data, her scores were clearly below average. One evening, Jinho woke up in the middle of the night and noticed that Ha-young's bed was empty. When she returned an hour later, she was slightly out of breath and her clothes looked like she had been exercising. She said she couldn't sleep and had gone for a walk. The security cameras in the corridors showed no sign of her during that time. But the next morning, the night guard mentioned that all the security checks had gone smoothly and there had been no problems anywhere in the station. Director Tae-min received regular reports about Ha-young's progress. On paper, she looked like a struggling student who might not make it through the training program. But the coded messages from Dr. Bioram told a different story. The medical scans showed things that no ordinary human should have. As the weeks passed, tensions began to rise throughout the galaxy. News reports spoke of aggressive alien fleets gathering at the edge of known space. The hegemony, a group of warrior species, was making threats against peaceful worlds. War seemed to be coming closer every day. The Academy started to change its training schedule. Combat exercises became more intense. Emergency drills happened more often. The instructors pushed the cadets harder and expected them to learn faster. Through it all, Ha-young remained the same quiet, unremarkable student she had always appeared to be. She helped her friends with their studies and encouraged them when they felt discouraged. She never complained about the harder training or showed fear about the growing threats, but sometimes, late at night when she thought no one was watching, her expression would change. For just a moment, her eyes would become cold and focused. In those brief seconds, she looked like someone who had seen too much and was ready for anything. Then Jinho would say something funny, or another cadet would ask for help with homework, and she would smile and become the friendly, ordinary girl they all thought they knew. Instructor Rilak had fought in 12 major battles across the galaxy. He had seen every type of fighter and knew how to read the signs of hidden skill. Something about Cadet Ha-young bothered him, but he couldn't put his finger on what it was. During morning combat training, he watched her more carefully than usual. She was sparring with another human cadet named Min-soo. On the surface, it looked like a normal practice match between two average students. Min-soo was slightly bigger and stronger, so he had the advantage, but Relik noticed things that the other students missed. When Min-soo threw a punch, Ha-young moved just enough to avoid it. Not too much, which would have looked skilled, but exactly enough to keep from getting hit. When she counterattacked, her strikes came close to vital points, but always missed by a few inches. It was like watching someone pretend to be bad at fighting after class. Relik pulled up the training records on his computer. Ha-young's scores were consistently average. Never the worst in the class, but never impressive either. Her improvement curve was perfectly normal for a struggling student working hard to get better, but when he looked at the biometric data, things got interesting. Her heart rate during combat stayed much lower than it should have. Her breathing remained steady even during the most intense parts of training. Her muscle tension readings suggested someone who was relaxed and in complete control. Rilek had seen thousands of cadets over the years. New students were always nervous during combat. Training, their bodies showed stress even when they tried to act confident. Hayoung's readings looked like those of a master fighter who was completely comfortable with violence. He decided to test his theory during the next day's endurance training. The exercise was simple but brutal. Cadets had to run through an obstacle course while carrying heavy packs. The course included climbing walls, crawling through narrow spaces, and jumping over barriers. Most students finished exhausted and sweating. Hayoung completed the course with her usual average time. She looked tired and out of breath when she crossed the finish line. But when Rilek checked the sensor data later, he found something impossible. Her vital signs showed that she had barely been working at all. Her body temperature hadn't risen. Her muscle stress indicators were lower than someone taking a casual walk. Either the sensors were broken, or Hayoung was hiding her true abilities. That evening, Rilek went to see Director Taemin in his office. The older man was working late, reviewing reports from across the galaxy. The news wasn't good. Hegemony ships had been seen near several peaceful colonies. Diplomatic talks had failed. War was coming whether they wanted it or not. "I need to ask you about one of the cadets," Rilek said. He closed the office door behind him and activated the privacy screen that would prevent anyone from listening to their conversation. Taemin looked up from his reports. "Which cadet?" "Hayoung." "The human girl in my combat class. There's something wrong with her training data." For just a moment, Taemin's expression changed. It was barely noticeable, but Rilek caught it. The director knew something about Hayoung that he wasn't sharing. "What kind of problems are you seeing?" Taemin asked carefully. Rilek explained about the biometric readings and the inconsistencies in her performance. He pulled up the data on his tablet and showed it to the director. The evidence was clear that something unusual was happening. Tae-min studied the information for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and serious. "Some cadets develop at different rates," he said. "Perhaps her body is adapting to the training faster than her skills are improving. It's not common, but it happens." Rilek wasn't satisfied with that answer. He had been training students for 20 years and had never seen anything like Hayoung's readings. But he could tell that Taemin wasn't going to give him more information. "Should I adjust her training program?" he asked. "No," Taemin said quickly. "Continue treating her like any other cadet. Let her develop at her own pace." After Rilek left, Taemin sent an encrypted message to Dr. Bio Ram. They needed to be more careful about monitoring Hayoung's performance. If an experienced instructor like Rilek was noticing problems, others might start asking questions too. The next week brought zero-gravity navigation training. The cadets were taken to a large chamber where artificial gravity could be turned off. They had to navigate through a complex three-dimensional course. Using only small thrusters on their suits, most new students struggled with moving in zero gravity. It took time to learn how to control direction and speed without up or down to guide them. Many cadets crashed into walls or got stuck floating in the middle of the room. Hayoung appeared to have the same problems as everyone else. She moved slowly and carefully, making the kinds of mistakes that all beginners made. Her official time for completing the course was in the middle of the class rankings, but the automated recording system captured something interesting. During one section of the course, Hayoung had moved through a series of obstacles with perfect precision and incredible speed. For about 30 seconds, she had flown through the course like someone with years of zero-gravity experience. Then she had slowed down again and resumed her careful, clumsy movements. When the instructor asked the students to submit their personal time records, Hayoung reported a slower time than what the sensors had actually measured. She claimed she had gotten confused and lost time in one section of the course. Dr. Bio Ram was waiting when Hayoung came in for her weekly medical check. The doctor had prepared more advanced scanning equipment and several new tests that weren't part of the normal routine. "I've been noticing some unusual readings in your previous scans," Dr. Bayoram explained. "Nothing dangerous, but I want to run some additional tests to make sure everything is working properly." The new scans took over an hour. Dr. Bayoram used equipment that could analyze muscle density, bone strength, and nervous system response times. She also took blood samples and tissue scans that would be analyzed in her private lab. "Have you been feeling any unusual symptoms?" the doctor asked. "Increased strength or speed? Better reflexes than you used to have?" Hayoung shook her head. "Nothing like that. I'm still struggling to keep up with the other cadets, but Dr. Bayoram's scans told a different story. Hayoung's muscle fibers were denser than normal human tissue. Her bone structure was reinforced in ways that suggested genetic modification. Her nervous system showed response times that were faster than any natural human could achieve. Most telling of all, her brain scans showed unusual activity patterns. Certain areas that controlled combat reflexes and tactical thinking were much more developed than they should be in someone her age." After Hayoung left, Dr. Bayoram compiled her findings into a detailed report. She encrypted it with the highest security codes and sent it directly to Director Taemin. The subject line was simple: "Project status confirmed." Meanwhile, Jinho was becoming more curious about his roommate's strange behavior. Hayoung continued to disappear at night, always claiming she couldn't sleep and needed to walk around the station. But Jinho had started paying attention to when she left, and when she returned, her nighttime absences always seemed to happen when there were security drills or maintenance work in sensitive areas of the station. When she came back, she was often slightly dirty or had small tears in her clothes that suggested she had been doing more than just walking. One morning, Jinho found her practicing combat moves in their room. She was moving through a complex series of attacks and defensive positions that were far more advanced than anything they had learned in class. When she noticed him watching, she stopped immediately and looked embarrassed. "I was just trying to remember the moves from yesterday's lesson," she said. "I wanted to practice so I wouldn't look so bad next time." But Jinho had been in the same lesson, and they hadn't learned any of the moves he had just seen her perform. That afternoon brought news that made everyone at the academy nervous. A supply convoy had been attacked by unknown ships near the outer system. The cargo vessels had been destroyed and their crews were missing. Long-range sensors showed evidence of advanced weapons that didn't match any known peaceful species. Director Taemin called an emergency meeting of all instructors and senior staff. The attacks were getting closer to the academy and intelligence. Reports suggested that the hegemony was testing their defenses. "We need to be ready for anything," Taemin told the assembled group. "The cadets should continue their normal training, but we should prepare for the possibility that this station could become a target." Instructor Rylick raised his hand. "Should we accelerate the combat training program? Some of these students aren't ready for real fighting." Taemin's eyes found Dr. Bayoram in the crowd. She gave him a slight nod that the others didn't notice. "Continue with the current program," Taemin said, "but start including more realistic scenarios in the training exercises. The cadets need to understand that the threats they're training to face are real." After the meeting, several instructors gathered to discuss their concerns. Many of them felt that the academy wasn't prepared for a serious attack. The defensive systems were designed to handle small threats, not a full military assault. "We have some good students," one instructor said, "but most of them are still learning basic skills. If the hegemony attacks this station, we'll be—" The alarm bells started ringing at 0347 hours, jolting everyone in the academy from sleep. Red emergency lights flashed in the corridors as the station's automated voice announced the crisis. "Emergency alert. Hostile ships detected in system. All cadets report to designated shelter areas immediately." "This is not a drill." Jinho sat up in his bed, confused and scared. Through their small window he could see bright flashes in the distance where ships were fighting. The Academy's defensive fleet was already moving to intercept the attackers. "Hi, Yang, we need to go," he said, reaching for his emergency kit. But when he turned around, his roommate was already fully dressed and ready. She had moved so quietly that he hadn't heard her getting up. Her emergency kit was packed perfectly, and she looked calm and alert despite having been asleep just moments before. "The shelter areas are this way," Ha-Young said, leading him toward the door. Her voice was steady and confident. Unlike the other cadets who were running around in panic, they joined the stream of students and instructors moving through the corridors toward the protected areas deep inside the station. The academy had been built with multiple layers of armor and defensive systems, but everyone knew that the shelter areas were the safest places to wait out an attack. Instructor Relek was helping to organize the evacuation. He counted cadets as they passed through checkpoints and made sure everyone was accounted for. When he saw Ha-Young, he noticed something that bothered him. While the other students looked frightened or excited, she seemed to be studying the emergency procedures with professional interest. "All cadets are to remain in the shelter areas until the all-clear is given," Relek announced. "The defensive fleet will handle the threat. Your job is to stay safe and out of the way." Most of the cadets nodded and continued toward the shelters. But Ha-Young stopped and turned back toward Relek. "Sir, I'd like to volunteer for evacuation assistance," she said. "I know the station layout well, and I could help guide people who get lost or confused." Relek frowned. Cadets weren't supposed to be involved in emergency operations. They were students, not trained personnel. But something in Ha-Young's voice made him hesitate. She sounded like someone who had experience with crisis situations. "The evacuation is being handled by trained staff," he said. "You need to get to the shelter area with the other cadets." "Yes, sir," Ha-Young replied. But Relek noticed that she didn't immediately follow the others. Instead, she hung back and seemed to be waiting for something. Director Taemin appeared in the corridor, moving quickly toward the command center. When he saw Ha-Young, he slowed down for just a moment. They exchanged a look that Jinho didn't understand, but it seemed to carry a lot of meaning. "Cadet Ha-Young," Taemin said quietly, "perhaps you could assist with checking the lower-level evacuation routes. Make sure no one is trapped or lost down there." Instructor Relek started to. "Object, sir, the cadets should be in the shelters. It's not safe for them to be wandering around the station during an attack." "Of course," Taemin agreed. "But someone needs to make sure the evacuation is complete. Cadet Ha-Young has shown good knowledge of the station layout. She can do a quick check and then report to the shelter area." Before Relek could argue further, Taemin was gone, hurrying toward the command center where the station's defense was being coordinated. Ha-Young gave Jinho a quick smile. "Go to the shelter," she told him. "I'll catch up with you in a few minutes." Jinho wanted to argue, but the emergency lights were still flashing and people were pushing past them in the corridor. He let himself be carried along with the crowd while Ha-Young disappeared in the opposite direction. The attack lasted for 3 hours. The Academy's defensive fleet fought bravely against the raiders, but the enemy ships were well armed and aggressive. Several cargo vessels were destroyed, and 2 Academy patrol ships were badly damaged before the attackers finally retreated. In the shelter areas, the cadets waited nervously for news. They could feel the station shaking when weapons fired, and the lights flickered occasionally when power was redirected to the defensive systems. Some of the younger students were crying, while others tried to act brave. Jinho kept looking toward the entrance, waiting for Ha-Young to arrive. But as the hours passed, she never showed up. When he asked one of the instructors about her, they told him that all evacuation personnel were accounted for and safe. Finally, the all-clear was given. The raiders had been driven off, and it was safe to return to normal activities. The cadets filed out of the shelter areas and began making their way back to their rooms. Instructor Relek was conducting a post-emergency debrief with his tactical team when one of the security officers approached him with a puzzling report. "Sir, we found something strange during our security sweep," the officer said. "There are several unconscious raiders in the lower levels of the station. They appear to have been taken down by hand-to-hand combat." Relek frowned. "That's impossible. All our security teams were accounted for during the attack. No one was supposed to be in the lower levels except for emergency personnel." That's what makes it strange, sir. These raiders were equipped with full combat armor and advanced weapons. But someone disabled them using precise nerve strikes and pressure point attacks. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. The security team led Relic to the lower levels where the unconscious raiders had been found. There were 6 of them, all members of the same aggressive species that had attacked the cargo convoy. They were big, strong creatures with natural armor plating and sharp claws, but each one had been taken down with surgical precision. Their armor showed no damage from weapons. Instead, they had been disabled using techniques that required extensive knowledge of alien anatomy and combat training that went far beyond what any Academy cadet should possess. The security cameras in this area malfunctioned during the attack, the security officer reported. We don't have any footage of who was responsible. Rylak examined the unconscious raiders more closely. The nerve strikes were perfectly placed. The attacker had known exactly where to hit each different species to cause temporary paralysis without permanent damage. This level of skill suggested military training at the highest levels. Have you checked with all the emergency response teams? Rylak asked. Maybe one of our security specialists came down here during the evacuation. We checked, sir. All personnel are accounted for, and none of them report being in this area during the attack. As they were discussing the mystery, Hayoung appeared at the end of the corridor. She looked slightly out of breath, and her uniform was a bit disheveled, but she seemed otherwise normal. Instructor Rylak, she called out. I finished checking the evacuation routes. Everything is clear down here. Rylak stared at her, then looked back at the unconscious raiders. The timing was too convenient to be a coincidence. Hayoung had been in the lower levels during the attack, and now they had found evidence of someone with advanced combat skills fighting the enemy. Did you encounter any problems during your check? He asked carefully. Hayoung glanced at the raiders, and for just a moment her expression became very still and focused. Then she looked back at Rylak with the same innocent, ordinary face. She always wore no problems, sir. I did find some areas where the emergency lighting had failed, but I was able to work around it. I got a bit lost at one point, which is why it took me so long to finish. Director Taemin arrived with a team of medical personnel to examine the captured raiders. When he saw Hayoung, he nodded approvingly. Good work on the evacuation check. Cadet, he said. I'm glad to see that our students can handle responsibility during a crisis. The medical team began moving the unconscious raiders to secure holding cells where they could be questioned when they woke up. As they worked, one of the medics made an observation that caught everyone's attention. These attackers were disabled. Using techniques I've never seen before, she said. Whoever did this has training that goes beyond normal military combat instruction. The precision required for these nerve strikes is incredible. Rylak watched Hayoung's reaction to this comment. She maintained her innocent expression, but he noticed that her hands had unconsciously moved into a defensive position. It was a subtle movement that someone with extensive combat training might make without thinking about it. Perhaps one of our senior security officers has more advanced training than we realized, Taemin suggested smoothly. The important thing is that the threat was neutralized and no one was seriously injured. As the group began to disperse, Rylak made a decision. He was going to find out the truth about Hayoung no matter what it took. The evidence was too strong to ignore. Somehow, this supposedly ordinary cadet had single-handedly disabled 6 heavily armed raiders, using combat techniques that should have been beyond her abilities. Later that evening, Jin-Ho cornered Hayoung in their room. He had spent the day thinking about everything that had happened, and he had too many questions to ignore anymore. Where were you really during the attack? He asked. And don't tell me you were just checking evacuation routes. I know something else is going on? Hayoung sat on her bed and looked at him for a long time. He could see her trying to decide how much to tell him. Finally, she sighed and spoke quietly. There are things about me that I can't explain right now. 3 weeks after the first attack, the Academy's long-range sensors detected something that made everyone's blood run cold. A massive fleet was approaching the system, much larger than the small raiding group they had fought before. The ships belonged to the hegemony, and there were hundreds of them. Director Taemin called an emergency assembly in the main auditorium. All cadets and instructors gathered to hear what he had to say. The mood was tense and frightened. Everyone knew that this attack would be different from the last one. The hegemony fleet will reach our system in approximately 6 hours, Taemin announced. His voice was calm, but his face showed the strain he was feeling. Our defensive fleet is moving to intercept them, but we must prepare for the possibility that some enemy ships will reach the station. Murmurs of fear ran through the assembled cadets. Many of them were barely out of their teens and had never faced real combat. The idea of the academy being attacked directly was terrifying. All cadets will be evacuated to the deepest shelter areas, Taemin continued. These areas are heavily armored and have independent life support systems. You will remain there until the threat has passed. Instructor Riluk stood up from his seat among the other staff members. Sir, what about the cadets who are in their final year of training? Some of them have already completed advanced combat courses. They could help with the defense. Taemin shook his head firmly. This is not a training exercise. The hegemony forces are experienced military units with advanced weapons and armor. Our students are not ready for that level of combat. Ha-young sat quietly in the back of the auditorium, listening to the discussion. Around her, other cadets whispered nervously about what might happen. Jinho was pale and shaking slightly. He had never been in a real battle, and the thought of the academy being destroyed was almost too much to handle, but Ha-young looked calm and focused. Her eyes moved around the auditorium, studying the exits and evaluating the defensive positions. She was thinking like a soldier, not a frightened student. After the assembly, the evacuation began immediately. Cadets were organized into groups and led toward the deepest parts of the station. The shelter areas were located far below the main levels, surrounded by multiple layers of armor and defensive systems. Ha-young walked with her group until they reached the first checkpoint. Then she quietly slipped away from the others and headed in a different direction. She had memorized the station's layout during her nighttime wanderings, and she knew exactly where she needed to go. Director Taemin was in the command center, coordinating the station's defenses with the fleet commanders. The main display showed the approaching hegemony fleet as red dots moving steadily toward their position. The Academy's defensive fleet looked pitifully small in comparison. Sir, one of the communications officers called out. The fleet admiral is requesting permission to fall back to a more defensible position. The enemy force is too large for a direct engagement. Taemin studied the tactical display. If the fleet retreated, the Academy would be left defenseless. But if they stayed and fought, most of the ships would probably be destroyed. Tell the admiral to use his best judgment, Taemin replied. But remind him that we have over 3,000 students and staff on this station. We need as much protection as possible. Dr. Bioram appeared beside him, carrying a sealed case. It's time, she said quietly. The evacuation is almost complete, and the enemy will be here soon. Taemin nodded reluctantly. They had hoped it wouldn't come to this, but they were running out of options. Are you sure she's ready? She's been ready for years, Dr. Bioram replied. The question is whether we're ready for the consequences of using her. The first enemy ships reached the outer defense perimeter 2 hours ahead of schedule. They moved faster than expected, and their weapons were more powerful than intelligence reports had suggested. The Academy's defensive fleet fought bravely, but they were quickly overwhelmed. Warning alarms began sounding throughout the station as enemy ships broke through the defensive line. The command center tracked multiple boarding pods launching from hegemony vessels and heading directly for the Academy. All security teams to defensive positions, Taemin ordered. Seal the critical areas and prepare for enemy boarding attempts. The first enemy soldiers breached the station's hull in the cargo bay areas. They were heavily armored troops from 3 different aggressive species, all working together under hegemony command. Their mission was simple: capture the Academy's command center and take control of the station's defensive systems. Instructor Rilak led a security team toward the breach points, but they were quickly pinned down by enemy fire. The hegemony soldiers had superior weapons and armor, and they moved with the precision of experienced military units. "We need to fall back to the second defensive line," Rilek radioed to the command center. "These troops are too well equipped for us to stop with standard security forces." As his team retreated through the station corridors, Rilek became separated from the others during a firefight. He found himself alone in a side corridor, trying to reach an alternate route back to the command center. That's when he heard the sounds of combat. Coming from up ahead, Rilek moved carefully toward the noise, keeping his weapon ready. What he found made him stop and stare in amazement. 6 hegemony shock troopers lay unconscious in the corridor. They were massive creatures, each one weighing over 300 pounds and covered in advanced combat armor. Their weapons were scattered around them, and their armor showed signs of precise strikes that had disabled their systems. Standing in the middle of the unconscious enemies was Hayoung. She wasn't even breathing hard. Her simple cadet uniform was slightly torn, but she showed no signs of injury or exhaustion. She looked up when she saw Rilek approaching, and for a moment, her expression was completely different from the innocent cadet he knew. Her eyes were cold and calculating. Her stance was that of a professional warrior who had just finished eliminating a threat. There was no fear, no excitement, just calm efficiency. Then she seemed to remember where she was and who she was supposed to be. The dangerous expression faded, replaced by the uncertain look of a frightened student. "Instructor Rilek," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I got separated from my group during the evacuation. These soldiers cornered me, and I got lucky." Rilek looked at the unconscious enemies, then back at Hayoung. Each of the shock troopers had been taken down with single, precise strikes. The level of skill required was incredible, and the strength needed to penetrate their armor was far beyond what any normal human could produce. "Lucky?" he repeated. "I remembered some of the combat techniques from class," Hayoung said quickly. "And they were focused on the corridor ahead, so they didn't see me coming. I managed to surprise them." Before Rilek could ask more questions, Director Taemin appeared with a squad of security officers. He took in the scene quickly, his eyes moving from the unconscious enemies to Hayoung and back again. "Excellent work, Cadet," Taemin said firmly. "Your quick thinking may have saved many lives." These troops were heading for the main power systems. "Sir," Rilek interrupted, "I think we need to discuss exactly how Cadet Hayoung was able to later." Taemin cut him off. "Right now, we have more immediate concerns. The enemy has breached multiple sections of the station, and we need every available person helping with the defense." More enemy soldiers were landing throughout the station. The hegemony forces were systematic and well organized, targeting critical systems and defensive positions. The Academy's security teams were fighting hard, but they were being pushed back on all fronts. In the command center, the tactical displays showed red enemy markers spreading through the station like a virus. Communications were being disrupted, and several key defensive systems had already been disabled. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the hegemony fleet commander. He's demanding our immediate surrender." Taemin looked at the display showing enemy forces throughout his station. Students and staff were hiding in the shelter areas, depending on him to protect them. The defensive fleet was scattered and mostly destroyed. In a few more hours, the Academy would fall. Dr. Bio-Ram approached him with the sealed case still in her hands. "It's time to activate the final protocols," she said. Quietly, Tae-Min hesitated for a moment longer, then nodded. "Do it!" Dr. Bio-Ram opened the case and removed a small communication device. She activated and spoke a single code phrase. "Project Avalon is authorized for full operational status." Somewhere in the station corridors, Hayoung stopped pretending to be confused and lost. The message had reached her through channels that no one else knew existed. Her orders were clear: protect the Academy and eliminate the hegemony threat by any means necessary. For the first time since arriving at the Academy, she allowed herself to be exactly what she had always been. The quiet, struggling cadet disappeared completely, replaced by something far more dangerous. The real Hayoung was about to show the galaxy what humanity was truly capable of, Instructor Relac was still trying to make sense of what he had witnessed. When emergency lights began flashing throughout the station, the main power grid was being rerouted and systems that had been dormant were suddenly coming online. "What's happening?" he asked one of. Captain Sojin arrived at the Academy 3 days after the hegemony attack had been repelled. Her battleship, the Indomitable, was one of the most powerful vessels in the human fleet, and her reputation as a tactical genius was known throughout the galaxy. She was also one of only 12 people who knew the truth about Project Avalon. Director Taemin met her at the docking bay personally. They walked together through corridors that still showed damage from the recent battle. Repair crews were working around the clock to fix the systems that had been damaged, but the scars of combat were still visible everywhere. "How is she?" "Captain," Sojin asked quietly as they moved away from the busy areas where people might overhear their conversation. "Maintaining her cover," Taemin replied, "but it's getting more difficult. Instructor Relac has been asking questions, and some of the other cadets are starting to notice inconsistencies." They entered Taemin's private office and activated the security shields that would prevent anyone from listening to their conversation. Captain Sojin studied the reports that had been prepared for her, including detailed accounts of Hayoung's activities during the attack. 17 enemy soldiers neutralized, she read. No casualties among our people in the areas where she operated. And still no one suspects what she really is? Instructor Relac has suspicions, but no proof, Taemin said. We've managed to explain away most of the evidence as lucky coincidences or sensor malfunctions, but that won't work much longer. Captain Sojin nodded grimly. She had helped train Hayoung during the early years of Project Avalon, before the girl had been sent to the academy for her cover assignment. Watching such a powerful weapon pretend to be an ordinary student was both impressive and heartbreaking. The intelligence reports are getting worse, she said, pulling up star charts on Taemin's computer. The hegemony is massing forces throughout this sector. What happened here was just a test to see how we would respond. The real invasion is coming. Meanwhile, Jinho was having his own crisis of faith about his roommate. During the attack, Hayoung had disappeared for hours. When she finally returned to the shelter area, she had claimed to be helping with emergency repairs in damaged sections of the station, but Jinho had been checking the official records, and there was no mention of Hayoung being assigned to any repair teams. More troubling, several other cadets remembered seeing her in different parts of the station at the same time, which was impossible unless she could be in multiple places at once. That evening, Jinho decided to confront her directly. He waited until they were alone in their room, then pulled out a collection of items he had been gathering over the past weeks. I found these hidden in your storage locker, he said. Placing several objects on the desk between their beds, Hayoung looked at the items and felt her heart sink. Jinho had discovered combat manuals written in languages that weren't taught at the academy. Technical documents about alien weapon systems that no cadet should have access to. And most damaging of all, a communication device that was clearly military-grade equipment. I can explain, she began, but Jinho held up his hand to stop her. I've been your roommate for months, he said. I've watched you pretend to struggle with things that you obviously understand perfectly. I've seen you disappear at night and come back with knowledge you shouldn't have. And during the attack, you somehow knew exactly what to do while the rest of us were terrified. Hayoung sat on her bed and looked at him for a long time. She had grown to care about Jinho as a friend, and lying to him was becoming harder every day. But her orders were clear: maintain her cover at all costs. What do you want me to say? She asked quietly. I want you to tell me who you really are, Jinho replied. Because you're not just a cadet from a farming colony. No one learns to fight like you do by accident. And no one has access to military intelligence reports unless they're connected to something much bigger than this academy. Before Hayoung could answer, their room's communication system activated. Director Taemin's voice came through the speakers. All cadets report to the main auditorium immediately. We have important information to share about the recent attack. and future security measures. Jin-Ho gathered up the evidence he had been showing her and put it back in its hiding place. "This conversation isn't over," he said as they headed for the door. The auditorium was packed with nervous students and instructors. Everyone wanted to know what the Academy planned to do about the growing hegemony threat. Rumors had been spreading that the recent attack was just the beginning of something much worse. Director Taemin took the stage, flanked by Captain Sojin and several other senior officers. His expression was serious as he looked out over the assembled crowd. 3 days ago, this academy faced its most serious threat since it was established, he began. The hegemony forces that attacked us were well-equipped and highly trained. They came here to test our defenses and gather intelligence about our capabilities. Murmurs ran through the crowd. Many of the cadets had suspected that the attack was more than just a random raid. "I'm pleased to report that our defenses held," Taemin continued. "The enemy was repelled with minimal casualties on our side. But this victory came at a cost, and it revealed some important truths about the nature of the threats we face." Captain Sojin stepped forward to address the crowd. Her uniform was covered with medals and decorations from years of combat service, and her presence commanded immediate respect. "The galaxy is changing," she said. "The peaceful cooperation that has existed for the past century is being challenged by aggressive forces that see diplomacy as weakness. The hegemony is just the most visible of these threats." She activated a holographic display that showed star charts with military movements throughout the sector. Red markers indicated hegemony forces, while blue markers showed the positions of friendly fleets. "Intelligence reports suggest that the hegemony is planning a major offensive campaign," Captain Sojin explained. "Their goal is to conquer or destroy every peaceful civilization in this part of the galaxy. The Academy is a strategic target because we train the officers who will lead the defense against them." Hayoung watched the display with professional interest. The troop movements and fleet positions matched information she had received through her own communication channels, but seeing it presented to the general population was unusual. Normally, such sensitive intelligence was kept classified. "What does this mean for our training?" asked one of the senior cadets. "Training will continue as normal," Taemin replied. "But we will be implementing additional security measures and emergency procedures. Some of you may be asked to take on additional responsibilities to help with the Academy's defense." After the assembly, the cadets scattered to their various activities. But Jin-Ho noticed that Hayoung didn't head back to their room or go to the library like she usually did. Instead, she walked toward a section of the station that was normally restricted to senior staff. He followed her from a distance, being careful not to be seen. Hayoung moved through the corridors with confidence, using access codes to open doors that should have been locked to cadets. She clearly knew her way around areas of the station that were supposed to be off-limits. Jin-Ho watched as she entered a secure conference room where Director Taemin and Captain Sojin were waiting for her. Through the partially open door, he could hear pieces of their conversation. "The situation is accelerating faster than we anticipated," Captain Sojin was saying. "Intelligence suggests that the hegemony main fleet will arrive within 2 weeks. We may not have time for a gradual revelation." "She's not ready for full exposure," Taemin replied. "The other cadets trust her because they think she's one of them. If they learn the truth too suddenly, it could cause panic or resentment." "The truth has a way of coming out during combat," Captain Sojin said grimly. "It might be better to control the revelation rather than let it happen naturally." Jin-Ho couldn't hear Hayoung's response, but her voice was different from the uncertain tone she usually used. She sounded confident and professional, like someone accustomed to making important decisions. He crept closer to try to hear more, but a hand suddenly grabbed his shoulder. Dr. Ram had appeared behind him without making a sound. "Cadet Jin-Ho," she said quietly, "you shouldn't be in this area of the station. I was just ... He began, but she cut him off with a shake of her head. "I know exactly what you were doing," Dr. Ram said. "And I understand why. You care about your roommate and you want to understand what's happening to her. but some secrets exist for good reasons. She guided him away from the conference room and toward the main corridors. As they walked, she spoke in a voice so quiet that only he could hear. There are things happening in this galaxy that are bigger than any individual person, she said. Sometimes people have to make sacrifices to protect others, even when those sacrifices are difficult or painful. What kind of sacrifices? Jin-Ho asked. Dr. Bioram stopped walking and looked at him directly. The kind where you give up your normal life to become something else. The kind where you can never go home again because home doesn't exist anymore. The kind where you pretend to be weak so that your enemies underestimate you until it's too late. Jin-Ho felt a chill run down his spine. Are you talking about Hayoung? I'm talking. The emergency alarm started screaming at dawn, but this time they sounded different. Instead of the short bursts that meant drill or minor threat, the alarms were continuous and urgent. Every person on the Academy station knew what that sound meant. Massive enemy forces were approaching, and this time there would be no escape. Director Taemin's voice echoed through the corridors over the communication system. All personnel report to designated emergency stations immediately. This is not a drill. Enemy fleet detected approaching at high speed. Estimated time to engagement, 4 hours. In their room, Jin-Ho and Hayoung were already awake and getting dressed. Through their small window, they could see the distant flashes of the Academy's defensive fleet moving into position. But even from this distance, it was clear that the enemy force was much larger than anything they had faced before. This is it, isn't it? Jin-Ho said, his voice tight with fear, the real attack. Hayoung was putting on her cadet uniform, but her movements were different now. Instead of the uncertain, clumsy motions she usually made, she dressed with quick efficiency. Her expression was calm and focused, like someone preparing for a job they had trained for their entire life. Yes, she said simply, this is what they've been building up to. They joined the stream of cadets and instructors moving through the corridors toward their assigned emergency positions. But instead of heading to the shelter areas like the other students, Hayoung stopped at a junction that led toward the restricted sections of the station. I have to go a different way, she told Jin-Ho. What do you mean? We're supposed to stay with our groups? Hayoung looked at him with an expression that was both sad and determined. Jin-Ho, there are things I haven't told you. Things I couldn't tell you. But you're going to find out very soon, and I want you to know that everything I've done has been to protect people like you. Before he could ask what she meant, Director Taemin appeared with Captain Sojin and Dr. Bioram. They moved with the urgent purpose of people who had been planning for this moment for a long time. It's time, Captain Sojin said to Hayoung. The main hegemony fleet will be here in less than 4 hours. We can't maintain the deception any longer. What deception? Jin-Ho demanded. What's going on? Director Taemin placed a hand on Jin-Ho's shoulder. You deserve to know the truth, Cadet, but first, we need to get you and the other students to safety. Dr. Bioram will escort you to the main shelter area. No, Jin-Ho said firmly. If something's happening to Hayoung, I want to stay with her. Hayoung shook her head. Where I'm going, you can't follow, not yet. But I promise you'll understand everything soon. Dr. Bioram gently but firmly guided Jin-Ho toward the shelter areas. As they walked away, he looked back to see Hayoung disappearing into the restricted sections of the station with the senior officers. The last thing he saw was her expression changing from the uncertain cadet he knew into something harder and more dangerous. In the main shelter area, hundreds of cadets and junior staff waited nervously for news about the approaching attack. The walls here were the thickest on the station, designed to protect against direct hits from enemy weapons. But everyone knew that if the hegemony captured the academy, even these shelters might not be safe. Instructor Rilak was helping to organize the shelter assignments when Director Taemin's voice came over the communication system again. Attention. All personnel. I need to share some important information about our current situation and the Academy's defensive capabilities. The shelter area fell silent as everyone listened. On the walls, Display screens activated to show Taemin speaking from the command center. Behind him, they could see the tactical displays showing hundreds of enemy ships approaching their position. 4. The past several years, this academy has served as more than just a training facility, Taemin began. It has also been the cover for one of humanity's most important defense projects. What I'm about to tell you may be difficult to understand, but it's crucial that you know the truth. Murmurs of confusion ran through the assembled people. Many of them had suspected that the academy had secrets, but no one had imagined anything like what Taemin was about to reveal. When humanity first encountered hostile alien species, our governments realized that we were physically outmatched by many of our potential enemies. The solution was Project Avalon, a program to create enhanced humans who could defend our colonies and allies against threats that conventional forces couldn't handle. The display screens changed to show classified documents and technical readouts that most of the audience had never seen before. Genetic modification charts, training records, and mission reports that painted a picture of a secret program that had been running for decades. Project Avalon produced several enhanced operatives over the years, Taemin continued. Most of them died in classified missions protecting human settlements from attacks that the general population never knew about. But one operative survived, and was assigned to protect this academy. Jinho felt his heart stop as he began to understand what Taemin was saying. Around him, other cadets were starting to whisper and point as they reached the same conclusion. For the past year, Cadet, Hayoung has been living among you as Project Avalon's last active operative. Everything about her background was carefully constructed to hide her true nature and abilities. She has been protecting all of you from threats you never knew existed. The shelter area erupted in shocked conversations. Some cadets refused to believe what they were hearing. Others began remembering strange incidents and unexplained events that suddenly made sense in a new and frightening way. Instructor, Relux stood frozen as all the pieces finally fell into place. The impossible biometric readings, the unconscious raiders found in the corridors, the perfect combat techniques disguised as lucky accidents. Hayoung had been hiding in plain sight, and he had been too focused on conventional explanations to see the truth. The quiet girl who helped you with your homework is humanity's ultimate weapon? One of the cadets asked in disbelief. She's been pretending to be weak this whole time? Asked another. Jin-Ho thought about all the nights Hayoung had disappeared from their room. All the time she had known things she shouldn't have known. All the small signs that he had noticed but hadn't understood. His roommate, the person he had shared meals and study sessions with, was something far beyond anything he had imagined. On the display screens, Captain Sojin took over the briefing. The hegemony fleet approaching us consists of over 400 ships, including their most advanced dreadnoughts. Under normal circumstances, the Academy's defenses would not be sufficient to repel an attack of this magnitude. She activated new displays showing the station's hidden defensive systems. Weapons arrays that had been concealed within the Academy's structure began to emerge. Shield generators that had never been tested came online. The entire station was transforming from a peaceful educational facility into a military fortress. However, this academy was designed as more than just a school. It's also a testing ground for advanced human defensive technology. Systems that have been hidden for years are now coming online. And with an Avalon operative to coordinate them, we have capabilities that the hegemony doesn't know exist. In a secure chamber deep within the station, Hayoung was undergoing her own transformation. The simple cadet uniform was replaced with advanced combat armor that had been designed specifically for enhanced humans. Neural interface systems connected her directly to the Academy's defensive networks. Weapons that no normal person could handle were calibrated to her enhanced reflexes and strength. Dr. Boaram ran final medical scans to ensure that Hayoung's systems were functioning at optimal levels. The genetic modifications that had been hidden for so long were now fully active, turning her from an ordinary-looking young woman into something that could stand against an army. "How do you feel?" Dr. Boaram asked. "Like I can finally stop pretending," Hayoung replied. Her voice was different now, carrying the confidence of someone who no longer had to hide their true capabilities. Director Taemin joined them in the chamber. The cadets are asking a lot of questions. Some of them feel betrayed that you kept this secret for so long. I understand, Ha-young said, but they're alive because I kept the secret. If the hegemony had known what I was from the beginning, they would have brought a much larger force to the first attack. Captain Sojin activated the tactical displays that showed the approaching enemy fleet. Speaking of which, we have less than 2 hours before the first enemy ships reach our perimeter. Are you ready for full operational status? Ha-young looked at the displays, calculating speeds and weapons ranges with enhanced mental abilities. That could process information faster than any computer. I've been ready for this my whole life. Back in the shelter area, Jinho was struggling to process everything he had learned. The other cadets were asking him questions about Ha-young. Assuming that as her roommate, he must have known the truth all along. Did you really not know? Asked Minsu, another human cadet. You lived with her for months. There must have been signs. There were signs, Jinho admitted. But I thought she was just, I don't know, maybe she had some military training before. Coming here, I never imagined anything like this. Instructor Rilek approached the group of human. The transformation of Ha-young was complete. She stood in the Academy's command center wearing armor that seemed to flow like liquid metal across her body. Neural interface cables connected her directly to the station's defensive systems, allowing her to control weapons and shields with the speed of thought. Captain Sojin watched the displays as the first hegemony ships entered weapons range. They're not bothering with demands for surrender this time. They're coming straight at us with everything they have. Director Taemin studied the tactical situation. Over 400 enemy ships were approaching in a carefully coordinated attack. Formation. Their strategy was clear: overwhelm the Academy's defenses with massive firepower, and capture the station before reinforcements could arrive. They don't know about our hidden systems, he said. That gives us the element of surprise, but only for the first few minutes of engagement. Ha-young closed her eyes and felt her consciousness expand through the Academy's networks. Every sensor, every weapon, every defensive system was now under her direct control. She could see the approaching enemy fleet as clearly as if she were standing next to them. Hegemony lead ships are moving into attack position, she reported. Her voice was calm and professional, carrying none of the uncertainty it had held when she was pretending to be a struggling cadet. They're expecting standard defensive responses. I can give them something very different. The first enemy salvos struck the Academy's outer shields. The massive energy blasts would have overwhelmed any normal educational facility. But the hidden defensive systems absorbed the impacts and began charging the station's concealed weapons. Arrays. Fleet Commander Gaxter of the Hegemony watched the attack from his flagship. He was a veteran of dozens of successful campaigns, and he expected this battle to follow the same pattern as all the others. The Academy would fight bravely for a few hours, then surrender when their defenses were overwhelmed. Target their command center, he ordered his weapons officers. Once their leadership is eliminated, the rest will fall quickly. But as his ships moved closer to the Academy, something unexpected happened. The station's outer hull began to shift and change. Concealed weapon ports opened to reveal beam arrays that were far more advanced than anything the Hegemony had encountered. Before, shield generators that had been hidden for years came online, creating defensive barriers that deflected energy weapons like they were toys. What is this? Gaxter demanded. Intelligence reports said this was an educational facility with minimal defenses. Sir, his tactical officer replied, the energy readings we're getting from that station are impossible. No facility this size should have weapons of this magnitude. Ha-young opened her eyes and smiled. Through the neural interface, she could feel the Academy's full power flowing through her consciousness. Years of hiding and pretending fell away as she finally allowed herself to be what she had always been trained to be. Engaging enemy fleet, she announced. The Academy's hidden weapons opened fire. The beam arrays that emerged from the station's hull were based on technology that humanity had been developing in secret for decades. Each weapon could punch through the armor of a hegemony dreadnought with a single shot. The targeting systems were so precise that they could disable specific components of enemy ships without destroying them completely. Commander Gaxter watched in shock as his front line ships began taking devastating hits from weapons that shouldn't have existed. The careful attack formation that had worked against dozens of other targets was falling apart as ships tried to evade fire that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "How many weapons does that station have?" he shouted. His tactical officer was studying the sensor readings with growing alarm. "Sir, the entire station appears to be a weapons platform. We're reading over 200 individual beam arrays, plus missile launchers and defensive systems that we can't even identify." But the most frightening thing wasn't the weapons themselves. It was how they were being used. Every shot was perfectly placed. Every targeting decision was made with inhuman precision. The Academy's defenses were operating with a level of coordination that suggested a single, controlling intelligence. Inside the station, Hayoung moved through the corridors with fluid grace. The neural interface allowed her to control the external weapons while simultaneously coordinating internal security. When hegemony boarding pods managed to breach the hull, she was ready for them. The first group of enemy soldiers who made it inside the Academy found themselves facing something they had never encountered before. Hayoung moved through them like a force of nature, her enhanced reflexes allowing her to dodge their weapons while her increased strength let her disable their armor with precise strikes. Instructor Rillick and his security team watched through the internal monitoring systems as Hayoung cleared section after section of invaders. She moved faster than the cameras could track, appearing and disappearing like a ghost. Enemy soldiers who had seemed unstoppable just moments before were left unconscious in her wake. "Is that really the same cadet who used to ask for help with her homework?" one of the security officers asked in amazement. Rillick shook his head slowly. "No, it's not. The cadet we knew was just a mask she wore. This is who she really is." In the shelter areas, the cadets were watching the battle through the emergency displays. They could see the Academy's weapons tearing through the hegemony fleet, but they could also see that more enemy ships kept arriving. The initial surprise had given them an advantage, but the battle was far from over. Jinho stared at the tactical displays showing Hayoung's position moving through the station. She was everywhere at once, coordinating defenses and eliminating threats with terrifying efficiency. This was his roommate, the girl who had helped him study and listened to his worries about his family back home. "She's been protecting us this whole time," he said quietly. "Every night when she disappeared, every time she acted like she didn't understand something in class, she was keeping us safe." Some of the other cadets were beginning to understand the scope of what Hayoung had sacrificed for them. She had given up any chance at a normal life to become humanity's guardian. She had hidden her true abilities and endured their pity and condescension because it was the only way to protect them from threats they couldn't even imagine. Commander Gaxter was becoming desperate as his fleet continued to take heavy losses. The Academy's defenses were unlike anything the hegemony had ever faced. Their weapons were more advanced, their targeting was perfect, and their coordination suggested planning that went back years. "Send a transmission to all ships," he ordered. "Concentrate all fire on the station's central section. If we can penetrate their core defenses, we might be able to force them to surrender." The remaining hegemony ships began focusing their attacks on the Academy's main structure. Massive energy blasts hammered the station's shields, causing power fluctuations throughout the facility. In the command center, warning alarms began sounding as critical systems came under strain. Hayoung felt the increased pressure through her neural connection. The Academy's defenses were powerful, but they weren't unlimited. If the enemy kept concentrating their fire, they might eventually break through. "Sir," she said to Director Taemin, "I need to activate the final defensive protocol." Taemin hesitated. The final protocol would reveal capabilities that humanity had kept secret for decades. Once it was used, there would be no going back to the all. 6 months had passed since the Battle of the Academy, and the galaxy was still trying to understand what had happened. The defeat of the hegemony fleet had sent shockwaves through every star system. Peaceful species that had lived in fear for decades suddenly found themselves protected by an alliance they hadn't known existed. Aggressive empires that had planned their own campaigns of conquest quietly abandoned those plans and focused on defending their own territories. The Academy had been rebuilt and expanded. What had once been a simple training facility was now the headquarters of the Galactic Defense Alliance, a coalition of peaceful species working together under human leadership to maintain stability throughout the galaxy. Ha-Young stood in her new office, looking out at the construction crews that were adding new sections to the station. Ships from dozens of worlds came and went regularly, bringing cadets and officers who wanted to learn the defensive techniques that had defeated the hegemony. She was no longer pretending to be a struggling student. Her official title was Director of Special Operations, and her reputation as humanity's guardian had spread to every corner of known space. But despite her new status, she still made time for the friends she had made during her months as a cadet. Jin-Ho knocked on her office door and entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. He was now a senior cadet and one of the Academy's most promising tactical students. The experience of living through the hegemony attack had changed him, from a nervous farm boy into someone who understood the realities of protecting innocent people. The morning briefings are ready, he said, setting one of the coffee cups on her desk. Intelligence reports show 3 more aggressive species requesting peace talks. Apparently, they've decided that picking fights with humans isn't a good idea anymore. Ha-Young smiled and accepted the coffee gratefully. Any word from the outer colonies? I'm still worried about those hegemony remnant groups that escaped after the battle. Admiral Hyansu's task force tracked down another cell last week, Jin-Ho reported. They were planning to attack a mining colony in the Vega system, but our intelligence network gave us advance warning. The colonists were evacuated before the raiders arrived, and the attack force was captured intact. This was the new reality of galactic politics. Humanity's hidden defensive network had revealed itself to be far more extensive than anyone had imagined. Intelligence agents who had been operating undercover for years were now working openly. Military forces that had pretended to be civilian. Cargo fleets were patrolling trade routes and protecting vulnerable colonies. The revelation had been shocking, but most peaceful species had welcomed it. For the first time in generations, merchant ships could travel without fear of piracy. Colonies on the frontier no longer worried about surprise attacks. The galaxy had protectors who were both willing and able to stand up to the predators that had terrorized it for so long. Dr. Bo Ram entered the office carrying a medical tablet. She was still the Academy's chief medical officer, but her role had expanded to include overseeing the health and training of other enhanced humans who were being brought out of hiding. The monthly physical is complete, she told Ha-Young. All systems are functioning normally, and your stress levels are much lower than they were during the covert operation phase. It's easier when you don't have to pretend to be someone else, Ha-Young replied. I never realized how exhausting it was to constantly hide my abilities until I was finally allowed to use them openly. Dr. Bo-Ram nodded understandingly. The psychological profiles of all our operatives show similar improvements once they're able to operate without cover identities. Humans aren't designed to live double lives indefinitely. She paused and looked out the window at the busy space traffic around the Academy. Have you given any thought to what you want to do long-term? The immediate threats have been neutralized, but there will always be new challenges. Ha-Young considered the question. For most of her life, her purpose had been clearly defined: protect humanity and its allies from external threats. But now that the galaxy knew about human defensive capabilities, her role was evolving into something more complex. I want to train the next generation, she said finally. Not just humans, but representatives from all the peaceful species. If we're going to maintain galactic stability, we need defenders who understand how to work together. Instructor Ralak appeared in the doorway, looking much more relaxed than he had during the tense months before the hegemony attack. His new position as Director of Combat Training gave him authority over defensive instruction for the entire alliance. Speaking of training, he said, the new class of interspecies cadets is ready for their advanced combat evaluation. Would you like to observe? Hayoung stood up and stretched. After months of administrative work, she welcomed any opportunity to get back to hands-on training. Let's go see how they're progressing. They walked through corridors that were much busier than they had been during the Academy's days as a simple school. Humans worked alongside Villani intellectuals, Krathari warriors, and dozens of other species. The diversity that had once been just an educational goal was now a practical necessity for galactic defense. The training facility had been expanded to accommodate the different physical requirements of various species. What had once been a single gymnasium was now a complex of specialized environments, where beings with different abilities could train together effectively. The current group of advanced cadets included representatives from 12 different worlds. Hayoung watched as they worked through complex scenarios that required cooperation between species with very different strengths and capabilities. They're learning faster than I expected, Rilak observed. The Krathari strength combined with Villani tactical analysis and human adaptability makes for a very effective combination. One of the human cadets in the group was Min-Soo, who had become one of the Academy's most dedicated students after witnessing Hayoung's revelation. He was working with a Villani partner to coordinate defensive positions while a Krathari teammate provided heavy combat support. After the exercise, Min-Soo approached Hayoung with a question that had been bothering him. Director, do you think we'll ever be able to achieve the kind of peace where enhanced humans like you aren't necessary? Hayoung considered the question carefully. It was something she thought about often during quiet moments. I hope so, she said finally. But until that day comes, someone needs to stand guard. The price of peace is eternal vigilance. What about the other Avalon operatives? Jinho asked. Are there others like you who are still in hiding? Dr. Bioram exchanged a glance with Hayoung before answering. There are a few others, but their situations are different. Some are serving in specialized roles where their cover identities are still necessary. Others are helping to train new defensive forces in remote sectors. The truth was more complex than they could explain publicly. Project Avalon had produced 12 enhanced operatives over the years. 7 had died in combat, protecting human colonies from threats that never made it into official reports. 3 others were still operating under deep cover in situations where their true identities couldn't be revealed. Hayoung was the only one who had been able to come out of hiding and operate openly. That evening, Hayoung received a priority communication from Captain Sojin, who was now Admiral Sojin and commander of the entire human defense fleet. Her image appeared on the secure communication screen in Hayoung's quarters. We've received intelligence about a new potential threat, Admiral Sojin reported. Long-range scouts have detected unusual activity in the Andromeda approach vectors. It could be nothing, but given our recent experiences, we're not taking any chances. Hayoung studied the data that accompanied the report. The sensor readings showed movement patterns that didn't match any known species. The scale suggested something much larger than anything the galaxy had encountered before. Do you think it's related to the hegemony? She asked. Unlikely, Admiral Sojin replied. This appears to be something entirely new. We're dispatching reconnaissance teams to investigate, but I wanted to give you advance warning. If this develops into a serious threat, we may need Project Avalon assets to be ready for rapid deployment. After the communication ended, Hayoung sat quietly in her quarters thinking about the implications. The galaxy had just begun to recover from the hegemony crisis, and now there might be a new threat emerging from the vast spaces between star systems. But unlike the previous crisis, humanity wouldn't face this challenge alone. The Galactic Defense Alliance now included dozens of species working together with shared purpose. The Academy was training a new generation of defenders who understood cooperation instead of conquest. Jinho knocked on her door and entered with a concerned expression. I couldn't help but notice the priority communication indicator. Is everything okay? Young smiled and gestured for him to sit down. There might be new challenges ahead, she said, but we're much better prepared to face them than we were a year ago. She looked out the window at the stars where human and alien ships patrolled together in formations that would have been impossible before the Academy's secrets were revealed. For the first time in my life, I don't feel like I'm carrying the burden of protection alone. The other species are,